Hi everyone, it's Jane, and today I want to talk about the first 11 chapters of Oliver Twist, but instead of going really deep into the book itself, we are going to be going very deep into the book. However, instead of just talking about each part and asking specific questions about that, I want to talk about some overarching themes that kind of introduces Oliver Twist and what Oliver Twist is all about. So this is not a video about the entire book. This is not a video that is going to cover every single theme in the book, and it's definitely not going to even cover the back half. Really, this is just a very nice introduction and at the same time analysis of the first 11 chapters of Oliver Twist. So you can just think about this as Oliver Twist analysis part 1, and part 2 will also be coming out shortly. So hopefully you have read those first 11 chapters. More is like perfect, the more the better. However, with this in mind, let's just dive right in. And so today I just want to talk about a lot of themes and more what each thing represents in Oliver Twist. And so Oliver Twist might be viewed as just the story of a poor pauper boy, but that is true and at the same time not true. Every single character and place and every single object almost has a meaning. It represents something greater beyond just that. And to look at that, I just first want to talk about the context. This is early 1800s England. This is when the Poor Law of 1834 has been passed, meaning that people who are very poor can now get food and shelter and clothing in exchange for a few hours of work. However, while it sounded like an amazing solution, it soon turned out to be one of the worst decisions ever made. That is because the people who are affected by the Poor Law were treated very badly at the workhouses where they worked in exchange for food and clothing. Not only was their work dismal, dangerous, and very, very hard and physically grueling, but they were half starved to death, to the point that one scandal revealed people eating rotting flesh from bones. And there's lots of really horrible examples, but the point is that overall the Poor Law did nothing but make the poor poorer and the rich richer, to the point that the status quo that had been in place for many, many years was just strengthened and just upheld more than ever before. Now, those people were subjected to grueling conditions. They barely had any food. Their clothing was practically in rags, and not only were they malnourished, but they were mistreated, looked down upon, and made to feel like scum. And so this is the context of this book. And this is a book, Charles Dickens wrote this book as a criticism of the Poor Law. Unlike other people in Victorian England, he sympathized with the paupers of that era. And if you look at Victorian England in the eyes of Oliver Twist, or just in the book, you will see two parts, the rich and the poor. Those are the two parts, and they're constantly battling each other. The rich are constantly trying to crush down the poor, and the poor are instead rebelling in different ways. And so these two levels are constantly fighting each other. They're struggling for dominance or survival in the case of the poor. And so imagine this setting of Victorian England. And now let's talk about what each character or even thing represents. Let's start with Oliver. Oliver is just the picture of somebody who has grown up in a workhouse. He's poor, he's skinny, he's not very big or strong, and like this is all because of the very little food that he was given. His spirit continues to be beaten down by those above him. And again, most people, nobody wants to be poor. And Oliver is that person, those paupers. He is the person who tries to get to a better life, who is not exactly rebelling, because how can he rebel? But at the same time, is driven to such hard conditions that he has no choice but to. Now, at least that's for Oliver. Now, many people were actually not given the opportunity to rebel. However, my point is that Oliver is that person. So whenever you think of Oliver, all the conditions that he is subjected to, think of every single person affected by the poor law at that time. That is Oliver. To get a better sense of what represents what, let's actually talk about some of the other people here. What about the board of the workhouse? What do they represent? Well, they represent the rich people. Not only the rich people, but those in power. You can call it the government, you can call it you can even call it the board. You can call it there's like so many ways to call it. The board can represent power. They can represent evil. Not evil, but they can represent misunderstanding. They can represent corruption. They can represent unfairness. There's so many things that they represent. But overall, the board and Mr. Bumble, they're not only the law, but they're also the people who are abusing their power, mistakenly subjecting those beneath them to horrible lives, and sometimes not even mistakenly doing those things. Mr. Bumble is the picture of self-importance. He's somebody who believes that he himself is the only important person in the world. Anybody below him is regarded as a lower being, somebody who is not as important, not as special, not as smart, not as grand as himself. And so the board and Mr. Bumble, they are the abusers of power, the people who are not only so conceited, but at the same time willing to use their power for the bad. Just think about it. In the beginning scene, Oliver is transported has to follow Mr. Bumble to the workhouse. Did Oliver have a choice to go to the workhouse? No. However, Mr. Bumble, in a very strong and official way, told him that he had to go. The board, after Oliver asks for more, immediately decides what to do with his fate. This is not only Oliver. The fact that every single person there was just unfairly subjected to unfair rules and obligations because of Mr. Bumble and the board. And so what I mean to say here is that, these people, the law, whatever you want to call them, they push the others around, and Oliver's the one being pushed. Think about it. Because Oliver represents all of the paupers of England at that time, and because Mr. Bumble and the board represent those in power, the abusers of power, and kind of the law as well, we have two forces. And while Oliver might not seem like the rebelling type, well, that's where the Artful Dodger and, Fagin and others come in. That is because, look at Fagin, look at Sykes or Nancy or the Artful Dodger or, any of those people. You might consider them immoral thieves who, should be imprisoned. And, maybe Sykes and some of them did deserve it. However, in the end, it was more out of need. For example, look at the Artful Dodger. The Artful Dodger is just a boy, just like Oliver Twist. He's driven into that situation because he's kind of forced to do because of Fagin. Without that, he has no livelihood. He doesn't have any other way to get food or shelter or clothing or anything like that. Stealing and pickpocketing are his only ways it is his only way to survive. And again, this is the fate versus free will argument. Can we control our destiny? In that situation, would you have resorted to thieving if that was the only way you would live? You could live? Probably. Most people would. And so what I'm trying to show here is that the Artful Dodger or any of those people, they are rebelling against people like Mr. Bumble. They are rebelling against the law. And so these two forces are rebelling. That's what Dickens, I feel, wants to show. Every single person is either on the rich side or the poor side. While there are some in-betweens, in the end, those bright spots of humanity are overpowered by the darker ones. And so in the end, we cannot consider the Artful Dodger or anybody like that as immoral people. For example, like Fagin or Sykes, they were evil. Fagin was the picture of exploitation and cruelty, and Sykes represents evil, even if unprovoked. However, in the end, think that the boys employed by Fagin are those who need that work, or else they would starve to death. They have no other means of survival. And if you think about it like that, it is, again, it's a struggle. And so let's think about it like this and then keep going through the book. Because did the Artful Dodger have any choice? No, he did not. And I think that that's another part of Dickens' book. How much being poor drives people to evil. Just consider this. Let's talk about the purity of the soul, or anything else like that. Actually, let's talk about Mrs. Sowerberry and Noah Claypole. I feel that this is a very important part that really ties into this theme. Mrs. Sowerberry and Noah Claypole, they're not very nice to Noah. They're not very nice to Oliver. In fact, they're kind of jerks to Oliver. Noah always teases Oliver, but not only so, but insults his mother and always bullies him, mistreats him, and looks down upon him. Mrs. Sowerberry lies to officials and says that Oliver tried to murder Noah and everybody else in the house. In that way, Oliver, because of them, was demonized to everybody else. Now, the powerless in the society look down on the even more powerless. So while Noah Claypole is only an apprentice, And while Mrs. Sowerberry is only the wife of a not very successful undertaker in a small village in the middle of the countryside, these people subject their power to Oliver, who is even more powerless than them. And so the thing is, people, just because they are poor, don't sympathize with people who are poorer than them. This is the nature of humanity. The people with power always look down on the people who have even less power. So think about what Dickens was trying to show the reader. He was trying to show the nature of human nature. He was trying to show the fact that people always want to use their power against smaller people. And however, we can look at Noah and Mrs. Sowerberry. While they are people who are more just bad, pure bad, than driven by means of poorness, Noah is always teased, and well, we don't really know that, but Mrs. Sowerberry and Noah, they're always lower than those self-important people, or even other people. Noah is only an apprentice. He's a charity boy. Mrs. Sowerberry is not a very powerful person, and because of this, just like the Artful Dodger, sure, it's immoral to take another person's watch or handkerchief or jewelry. It's not very nice to insult somebody else. And while at some instances they were not driven to do that because that was the only way that they could survive, in the end, all of them are kind of driven to that, whether fairly or unfairly, by poorness. That is the effect of being poor or just social circumstance. And I feel that as we explore this more, there are so many topics that we can cover. This is the exploration of human nature. This is talking about how people change according to their environment. This is kind of the nature versus nurture argument in a way. This is saying, are we changed because of our surroundings? Is Noah being a complete jerk to Oliver because of his surroundings? Would he have not been a complete jerk if he and Oliver were on the completely same level? Like, I would say brothers. Of course, brothers would probably like each other more, but you get the point, right? You get the point. How would that be different? And consider that. Consider morality. Consider situations that drive people to their extremes, and consider how we can kind of look at almost every single character again with new eyes with this example. But let's keep on going with what represents what. What about the food? The gruel, which is watery, is very small, is watery, is not very tasty, is actually pretty horrible tasting, I'm sure, and is like gruel itself sounds horrible, but even that is a watered down version of gruel. That represents the meager life of paupers, the horrible, malnourished, always below expectations. That is kind of being below expectations becomes the expectation for the lives of those who are in workhouses. Again, that is one of Dickens' main points. Now let's talk about sarcasm. Sarcasm might just seem, sarcasm, right? People use sarcasm, irony all the time. It's just one of those things that people do. Dickens uses sarcasm a lot. I mean, a lot. Sometimes it can get very confusing when we listen to sarcasm that he does, but in the end, I feel like this is the veiling of horrible truth. It represents that. Now you might say, but Dickens is being sarcastic. Like, we can kind of figure out after a while that he's joking, that he's saying that this is wrong. That's correct. However, what I'm saying is he's saying that in an indirect way. He's saying, like, for example, consider the paragraph on the board of the workhouse, and they decide, oh ho, and I'm like almost quoting from it. The poor people enjoy the workhouse. They enjoy the recreational activities and play. They're always playing, which is like totally not true, and there's like no recreational activities, but they say, oh, we must lessen the food. We must make sure that these people are driven, and they don't want to enjoy it. That they're only stay here and burden us because because they need to, right? And so as we go through, at first Dickens is sarcastic. He says the wise people of the board finally realized in their philosophical contemplations that, hey, the people enjoyed it. It's sarcasm, correct? At the same time, however, this is a veiling of horrible truths, because in Victorian England, people really did say, we are wise and philosophical. Like, they thought that was their mask. And so, in that way, some people will actually say the same thing without being sarcastic. And so in that way, Dickens is showing how people avoid that subject, how people did not say it, said it in a roundabout way, said it in a way that was not true at all, if it was not completely sarcastic. And so that's another way. Sarcasm is the veiling of horrible truths. And as you consider this, and as you consider so many other themes, you can really think of new themes and new things. You can think of new lessons that I have not thought of. And that's like the fascinating things about books. Maybe Dickens did not mean this. Maybe I am wrong about one of the things that Dickens said. But whatever the case, we can interpret it that way. And maybe Dickens did not say it like that. Maybe, he meant something else. For example, consider, that poem, Two Roads in the Yellow Wood. Two Roads in the Yellow Wood was originally written by Robert Frost as kind of a joke to his friend who always had trouble deciding which path to take and always regretted, the one that he didn't take. Well, I'm pretty sure Robert Frost was no dummy and that he was kind of thinking of that theme as well and just incorporated it. I mean, it's an amazing poem. Nobody could have written it blindly. However, my point is that in the end, all of those meanings of taking your own path, your life, and how this poem can change your life, how this tells you that you should pursue the more unique path. While Robert Frost has probably thought of some of them, he has not thought of every single meaning out there on the internet. And there's some really good ones. As you go through, you're going to find so many good themes, morals, and ideas from the poem that Robert Frost himself did not think of. And that's like the amazing thing about writing and literature. That's one of the main things I really love about reading books. So that's something that you should be considering as well as you read. Okay, let's keep on going. Now, let's talk about purity of soul, which is kind of the same thing as what we've been kind of talking about for the last, I have no idea how long, but for the last few minutes. Once more, can Oliver's soul be completely pure? Is that possible, right? When you're driven by all of this poorness, do you think that anybody's soul can be completely pure? And remember those bright spots that I was talking about, such as the old kindly gentleman or other people, right? I think that the reason that Dickens included them was that there are still kind people in the world. However, in the end, evil always wins over. They're always swept away by so many other forces, by so many other things. Dickens himself was one of those kind old gentlemen. and he wanted people he wanted to have for people to have better rights. However, in the end, I am pretty sure that there was a lot of public thought against him, a lot of public sentiment against him as well. And so consider those things as well. Basically, almost everything in such a good classic has a theme. Consider that while you're reading, and your mind might be open to so much more. Now, the last thing that I really want to talk about before we go away is people. Okay, so there's so many things about people. For example, consider the Undertaker himself. You know, he takes advantage of other people's misfortunes, but it's not entirely cruel. We can call him opportunistic, right? Hardship kind of means no morals. However, he's not a completely cruel person. However, once more, he's driven by his poorness. And we can't say, oh, the theme is people are driven by their poorness. We have to say more broadly, people are changed by their circumstances. If Mr. Bumble had started as an apprentice and made his way all the way to the position of power that he now has, how do you think that he changed because of his circumstances? Dickens alludes to this by saying that he would have very much liked to see one of those cold-hearted philosophers looking on at Oliver just consuming the meat, those leftovers that were not even good enough for the dog, with such hunger and such joy. And then for that cold-hearted philosopher himself to ravish and enjoy such scraps himself with as much vigor. And in this way, consider that as one of the main themes of Oliver Twist as you go through the book. Let's talk about some last few questions. How does Victorian England sound like to you? And we can notice Dickens' language, and we can kind of see Dickens did not want to portray Victorian England as a good place. He wanted to portray it as a cruel, hard, sometimes cold, barren place where there were not a lot of opportunities for many people. Oliver finds himself in a world that only cares for itself, for the individual self. People only think about themselves, or on the other hand, are fighting for survival and are therefore pushed to limits that they would not have been pushed to before. Now, if you were Oliver, would you have joined that gang of thieves? Would you have said, oh yeah, guys, take me in? Would you have said that? Or would you have said, oh no, I'm not going to be doing that? How would you have lived? Do you think that you would have been forced to join? Well, consider, you are in the middle of Victorian England, in which upper classes completely ignore or look down upon lower ones, where people are mistreated and Oliver was put into solitary confinement, was given very little food or water in a dark, practically a dungeon, and sold to the person who would take him first, even with their mistreatment. That just for asking for a bit more, on top of the small, tiny portion of watery, horrible gruel that he was given that morning before the regular mistreatment. And now Oliver's out in the open. If he does not work, he would very much starve to death. It's not just a chance. It is the reality. It's the rule in Victorian England. That chance meeting with the kind gentleman was 1 in a million, if not a billion, if not a trillion. Such things in real life would not have happened. Oliver, if he had not joined the gang of thieves, would have slowly starved to death until all that will be left of him were bones. In that way, he has no choice but to join. I would have joined. I'm pretty sure that a lot of the viewers would have joined. This is not an insult. This is saying that you are a human and that you value yourself, which should be what should be happening. If you don't, I feel that would not actually be less human than those who would join. Now, what do you think that London represents in Charles Dickens' books? And yes, I am looking at this screen right now because I made a lot of notes. I always forget some questions, so today I just decided to write a few of them down. And what do you think that London represents? The black heart of England, the very core of a kind of rotten apple. What do you think? You know, a rotten apple before was a delicious, crispy delight. And while not in real life, it can't be made to a delicious, crispy delight again. This is not real. You know, London society, humanity can be changed. Norms slowly and very slowly can be changed. And so now London is a beautiful place. And consider that. What do you think London is? And what do you think it really represents in the book? Is it a core of evil? Is it a place where the fights between the rich and the poor really take place? Is it a place of extremes? Is it a place of poverty? Is it a place of great injustice? What is it? And if you were Oliver, would you have run away from the apprenticeship / the workhouse? Would you have risked everything to go to London? And do you think that there's ever going to be an understanding between the two worlds? Even in this era, you know, we're seeing much less injustice, yet we cannot say that that inequality has completely disappeared. You know, it's definitely not completely disappeared. And so, in the end, I ask you, is there still an Oliver Twist in the 21st century? Do you think that somebody will write a book about such an Oliver Twist? And if so, who do you think that is? And do you think that this problem will ever be fixed? Or do you think that it will be against human nature to have it fixed? So that people are just too cruel to get to such levels that there can never be there can never be true equality in this world. Even if we create a system of laws and measures and countermeasures and regulations and rules that all try to promote this. Consider those things, and perhaps you will have a better understanding of what Oliver Twist represents. In conclusion, today we kind of talked about everything that Oliver Twist represents, whether it be inequality, whether it be the veiling of horrible truths, whether it may be the limits, how humans are pushed in their circumstances. We talked about Dickens' language. We talked about the Poor Law of 1834. We discussed nature versus nurture and how people such as the old gentleman, the people such as the old gentleman represent in this world. We considered future times. We considered whether or not there could still be an Oliver Twist. I think that there still is. We talked about the Gang of Thieves. We discussed Victorian England. And overall, I feel that today was just a great day. Hopefully, you really gained something new out of this video. And I'll see you next time. I hope that you have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you next time for another amazing video about either Oliver Twist or another great classic. Bye!